These walls were built to break the will. They were considered the final chapter in any pirate's story. This was a misconception. All these fortresses had one vulnerability. Their creators believed a pirate's main weapons were a cutlass and a pistol. They were wrong. Their main weapon was the knowledge of hidden systems, and one of them used what the guards considered merely the sound of the waves to escape. The walls of the Castillo de San Marcos in Florida, for example, were built from coquina, a compressed shellstone that absorbed cannonballs instead of shattering. The fortress was virtually immune to a direct assault, but its weakness wasn't in its walls, but in its connection to the ocean. The engineers saw this connection as a given. The pirates saw it as a map. Time and again, people stripped of everything outsmarted the most advanced control technologies of their era. This isn't a story about strength, but about intellect, about how desperation breeds a genius capable of finding a loophole in any system, no matter how perfect. This is a guide to hacking reality, written by those who had no margin for error. The pirate was like a hacker. He didn't crack the system's master password. He looked for a port forgotten by the developers or a vulnerability in the human factor. He didn't break the wall. He looked for a bug in its logic. In this video, we'll break down the 3 keys pirates use to open any lock: nature, psychology, and trash. We will see the blueprints for their homemade tools and understand why the most bored guard was more valuable to them than the cruelest one. And at the end, we will assemble this into a universal protocol for action in a hopeless situation. We will look inside a fugitive's toolbox and see how bread pulp became a key duplicator and urine, a chemical agent to dissolve cement. This isn't magic. It's the physics and psychology of desperation. The pirate's first and greatest ally was hiding in plain sight, simply noticed by no one: the ocean. To a jailer, there were 2 states of water, high and low. To a pirate, there were dozens. He read the tides like an open book, knowing precisely when the moon's gravity would create the perfect window of opportunity. A spring tide during a full moon would raise the water high enough to conceal a swimmer. A neap tide would expose a sewer grate long forgotten by the builders. Every 2 weeks, he gained an ally that could not be bribed or intimidated. The guards lived by the bell. The pirate lived by the moon. For months, he would watch the play of light on a wall, calculating the hour when a tower's shadow would be at its longest. He listened to the cries of gulls to know when fishermen were approaching. For the commandant, a storm was a curse. For the pirate, it was the perfect cover, muffling the sound of his work. This is reminiscent of the escape from Alcatraz, where Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers spent months studying the bay's currents. Their raft was designed for a specific tidal window. Pirates were doing the same thing 200 years earlier, turning their cells into scientific observatories. Imagine for a moment that you are locked up. You hear dripping water. To you, it's just noise. To a pirate, it's a metronome. He counts the drops to measure time. He analyzes their frequency to determine if it rained during the night and if the ground outside the wall has softened enough for digging. Where an ordinary person sees chaos, a pirate looked for a system. Psychologists call this pattern recognition under sensory deprivation. When the brain is deprived of its usual signals, it analyzes the few that remain with incredible precision. Dripping water became a Swiss chronometer that couldn't be confiscated. But even the perfect storm and the highest tide were useless if the pirate couldn't get past the world's most sensitive lie detector, the human gaze. And for that, they had a completely different set of lockpicks. A pirate understood that any fortress isn't made of stone, it's made of people. And people have vulnerabilities: boredom, greed, fatigue, arrogance. He would spend weeks studying not the masonry of the walls, but the habits of the guards. Who among them was lazy? Who drank on duty? Who hated his superior? Today, we would call this social engineering. The pirate was the first hacker of human souls. He didn't try to attack the system head-on. He looked for the weakest entry point, a bored, low-ranking guard whose password was 1234. The most valuable asset wasn't a cruel sadist, but one who was simply bored. The pirate would stage an entire performance. He might feign illness to get into the infirmary where security was weaker, or provoke a fight to be thrown into solitary confinement, the very cell whose weak floorboards he already knew about. It was a game of chess. Being sent to solitary wasn't a punishment, it was a tactical move, sacrificing a pawn to checkmate the system 3 moves later. They consciously accepted worse conditions for a strategic advantage. Now let's look at this through the eyes of a jailer, Juan. For him, it's day 500 on the job. He's paid pennies. He doesn't see a brilliant escape artist, but a dirty, ragged man who can barely stand. And when this wretch asks for an extra cup of water, Juan doesn't see the first step toward creating a tool to break the bars. He sees only weakness. And this arrogance is the main bug in the entire system. This is where a powerful cognitive bias kicks in, dehumanization. The guard stops seeing the prisoner as a person capable of a complex plan. He sees an object, a body, and this invisibility cloak woven from others' contempt was the pirate's best disguise. They also used disinformation. Through a bribed servant, they might spread a rumor about a planned riot in the North Wing, concentrating all the guards there while the real tunnel was being dug for weeks in the south. They created information noise to drown out the signal of their true actions. This is a direct quote from The Art of War: appear in the West and strike in the East. They intuitively applied the highest principles of military strategy, creating a phantom threat to divert the system's resources from the real breach point. But what if the walls were impenetrable and the guards incorruptible? Then it was time for an art we would now call DIY, the art of creating masterpieces from nothing. This was the engineer's hour, a time when the laws of physics became more important than the laws of the empire. For a pirate, the concept of trash did not exist. Every object was a resource. A fishbone from dinner was a potential lockpick. A metal button ground against stone became a blade. His mind worked like a reverse 3D printer. He didn't create, but deconstructed the world into its basic properties. A wooden spoon wasn't just a spoon, it was 50 grams of material with a known breaking strength. A wire from a mattress became a future hook. Their main principle was that every object has not only an obvious property, but also a hidden one, and they knew how to extract it. Here's how it worked. Step 1. The pirate would get an impression of a lock by discreetly pressing a piece of bread pulp into it. Step 2. Over several weeks, he would slowly and silently grind the handle of a pewter spoon against the stone floor, constantly checking it against the impression. Step 3. He would mask his work with dirt. It was geological erosion in miniature. Just as a river carves stone over centuries, the pirate, over hundreds of hours, micron by micron, reshaped the metal. One wrong, overly loud movement, and months of work would be wasted. It was a test not of cunning, but of Zen-like patience. But they also used primitive chemistry. Soured wine turned into vinegar. The acetic acid would react with the calcium carbonate in the mortar, slowly turning the cement into dust. Sometimes, even urine was used. The ammonia in it also weakened the masonry. This was a slow, invisible war against the very structure of the prison, a true 17th century thermite mixture created from organic waste. Let's create a scale of genius for these inventions. A sharpened bone, 3 out of 10. A rope made from hair and clothing, 5 out of 10. A working key made from a spoon, a solid 9 out of 10. Using pigeons to carry messages to accomplices on the outside by tying notes to their legs. That's a 10 out of 10, project management level. But a smuggled pig's bladder, inflated and used as a life vest to cross a moat. That's an 11 out of 10, bioengineering level genius. This all might sound like a collection of individual tricks. But in 1683, at the fortress of Cartagena, an event occurred that combined them all into one of the most audacious and perfectly planned escapes in history. It was the final exam for a master of escape. His name was Laurens de Graaf. The fortress of Cartagena was not just a prison. It was a spot on the map where the Spanish Empire stored its gold and ended stories. In its dungeons, several dozen pirates awaited execution, including their leader, Laurens de Graaf. They had 1 month. The fortress had a garrison of 300 men and moats filled with sharks. The chances of escape were 0. But the man in the cell was not a bandit. He was an enemy strategist trained in military tactics. The first thing de Graaf did was analyze the ocean's schedule. He wasn't looking at the waves, he was looking at the system, and he found a bug. Once a day, a powerful coastal current created a blind spot at the base of one of the walls, a point invisible to the sentries. This was his exit. Now he needed a key, and he found it in human greed. He studied the guards for weeks and chose his target, a young guard who was constantly losing money at dice. De Graaf operated like a modern project manager. Phase 1, analyze the environment and find a vulnerability. Phase 2, recruit an insider. For the promise of a share in mythical treasures, the guard began smuggling them oil and rags. The silent work began. From the rags in their own hair, they wove a rope. From fish bones, they made primitive tools. But their masterpiece was a lever fashioned from the leg of a prison bed. With the oil the guard brought, they lubricated the hinges of their cell bars night after night. Every creak, every strike against the stone was synchronized with a clap of thunder or the changing of the guard. They didn't break the prison, they delicately disassembled it piece by piece. It was a symphony of destruction where every sound was a carefully calibrated note. On the appointed night, a thunderstorm broke out. While the storm distracted the entire fortress, De Graaf's team executed the plan with surgical precision. They removed the bars. One by one, they descended the rope into the very blind spot where the current became their ally. By morning, when the alarm was raised, they were gone. They didn't just escape. They humiliated the entire system of imperial security, carrying out a special operation without firing a single shot. They gained their freedom, but they had made their most important escape long before that night, an escape from the prison of their own minds, from the trap called "It's Impossible." The walls of Cartagena were merely the final boss in a game they had already won in their heads, the battle against despair and resignation. The main enemy in a cell is not the steel of the bars, it is time. Time breeds despair, and the pirates hacked this system. For them, imprisonment was not a punishment, but a preparatory phase. Having a long-term, almost impossible escape plan turned a meaningless wait into meaningful work. Each day was not lost, but invested in future freedom. The psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, a concentration camp survivor, wrote that survival belongs to those who find meaning even in suffering. The escape plan was that meaning. It turned the poison of slowly passing time into medicine, a resource for observation and preparation. They broke the enormous task of escaping into hundreds of microtasks: study the guard change schedule, find a loose stone in the wall, hide a sharpened tool. Accomplishing each task gave them a dose of dopamine and an illusion of control. They didn't just dream of freedom, they rehearsed it every day in their imagination. In essence, they invented the Agile methodology 300 years before Silicon Valley. The escape was their project. Each week was a sprint with specific goals. Successfully grinding a spoon down by 1 millimeter provided the psychological reinforcement needed to keep from giving up. In prison, information is currency. The pirates created entire networks to exchange data between cells. Knowing that the commandant was ill, or that an inspection from the capital was expected, could completely change their strategy. They transformed the prison from a black box into a transparent system full of loopholes. They built their own internet using the prison's hardware, water pipes to transmit messages in Morse code, threads stretched between windows for file sharing. Just as in modern espionage, possessing exclusive information was the key to success. These people, who lived 300 years ago, intuitively discovered the fundamental laws of psychology and systems analysis. They left us not just tall tales, but a real protocol for situations that seem hopeless. They didn't write management textbooks, but their actions are a ready-made guide for hacking any closed system, a survival manual that is still relevant today. And here is that protocol. It consists of just 3 principles. First, find your tide. In any closed system, whether it's a toxic job or a creative block, there are natural cycles. Don't try to break through the wall. Observe. Find a pattern, the system's weakest hour, and use its energy for your own purposes. This is the principle of judo applied to life. Don't resist force. Redirect it. Don't be the hammer trying to shatter granite. Be the water that patiently finds and widens an existing crack. The second principle, hack the human firewall. The most complex problem is often solved not through technical means, but through human vulnerabilities. Arrogance, inattention, predictability, these are bugs in any system. Understand the motivations of the people who control it, and you will find the key. Cybersecurity experts today say that up to 90% of successful breaches are due to human error. The pirates knew this intuitively. The most secure lock is useless if you can trick a guard into giving you the key. And the third principle, think like an engineer of desperation. Stop thinking about what you don't have. Take inventory of what you do have, even if it seems like trash. Your greatest resource isn't money or power. It's your ability to combine existing elements in unexpected ways. Desperation is fuel for creativity. It's the Apollo 13 syndrome. When the engineers on the ground didn't have the right parts to repair the spacecraft, they dumped everything the astronauts had on board onto a table and said, "We have to make this out of this." Your trash is your toolkit. Their methods were brilliant, but their goals were robbery and violence. This leaves us with the main question. Who were these people? First and foremost, ruthless bandits who simply wanted their freedom, or brilliant systems analysts of their time? Write just one word in the comments, bandits or geniuses.